Hey, welcome to the Sequential Artists Workshop Pro Calls. Every week we ask another creator, another graphic novelist to come sit down with us and tell us where they came from, what were the first things they made, what did they make recently, how did they do it, what are they thinking about now, how are they going to move forward, how do they keep going, all those things, career things, art things, feeling things, creative things. Every month it's a new creator, new challenges, new stories. Come check it out. Come sit down with us. You can sit down live for some of these calls by being a member of our groups. You can find us at learn.sawcomics.org. Come check it out. Come be a graphic novelist with us. Come join us on the socials. Sometimes it's Comics Workshop, sometimes it's Saw Comics. Either way, come check us out and welcome. Welcome, everybody. This is the Comics Flow Pro Call, sort of monthly thing we do for the people who are in the SAW community and membership programs and groups. And we've really lucky to have Robyn Chapman again today. I think, Robyn, you did this like 3 years ago or something, and we're just always really happy to get your knowledge and your wisdom about everything. And also, I'm just gabbing while you set it up, Robyn. So you let me know when you're ready. Oh, look. And Robyn, I've known Robyn, and I think I called her a friend for an incredibly long time. It's really just wonderful to reconnect every once in a while. Although sometimes we wave at each other at festivals. I almost thought I saw you at Short Run this weekend, but you weren't there. I was like, is that Robyn? And it wasn't. um, so anyway, Robyn's been self-publishing and publishing other people for decades. It hasn't always been called Paper Rocket, or was it always called Paper Rocket? I can't remember.
It wasn't. Hold on one second.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just trying to see if I can turn down. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have an echo? Because I know how to solve that now.
I have an echo because the iPad, I can't turn it down all the way.
Yeah, what you need to do is go to your iPad, and somewhere there's a little red button that'll with a speaker, and you need to disconnect audio. That's what does it.
Okay. Um, I don't know if I'll figure that out in time. So
Okay,
maybe I'll just ignore it.
that's up to
I
you.
don't
But
I don't think you guys can hear it, right?
no, I think it sounds okay.
Okay, cool. Um, I'd plug in my headphones. That's what I usually do. But this iPad is dying, so I needed to be plugged in. But yeah, I've been self-publishing, since I was a teenager, really. So I have used a couple of names over the years. I've used like way back in the day, Unpopular Comics. I don't know
Oh yeah,
if that
unpause.
you might remember that.
Sure.
But
I
I've
used
been
to email
doing
you at that
I-
address. Sorry.
but I've been doing Paper Rocket Minicomics for it might be, I think it's shortly after I moved back to New York, which was 2010. So
Uh-huh.
it's coming up. It's probably 13 years, 14 years, um, coming up on 15 years, which is exciting.
Cool. Okay.
But yeah, that's a little company. I kind of use the word broadly because this is really isn't a business in the sense that I'm trying to make income and live off of it, anything. But it's a micropress, a very small one-person publishing company that puts out mostly mini comics, but every once in a while an anthology, like a bound book. And it kind of just expands or grows to the space I have in my life for it, because I do have a full-time job and there isn't a lot of space, to be honest. But I can put out like 4 to 5, maybe 6 mini comics a year by other people. I publish other people. That that helps me be a lot more prolific. Um, an anthology every few years. And I just take it year by year because my day job does get kind of more demanding every year. And I kind of see, am I going to keep self-publishing this year? Yeah, I think so. But now I'm teaching as well. I teach at SVA. Um, so it is, I will see how much space I have in 2025. I'm really not sure what the publishing I'll do next year will be.
Okay. And so I'll let you explain more, but your full-time job is exciting. Also, you're an editor at First Second, so I'm
Mhm.
sure you'll explain that. And yeah, I see you at all the festivals. except short run today, this week. All right. So, excuse me, you want to just get into it? I see you've got a slide
Yeah,
up and you can just give us your presentation. We'd love to see it.
sure.
We'll open up the chat.
So yeah, this is a little presentation that I put together for my other class. This year I started teaching professional practices at SVA. And so I have this presentation kind of introducing my students to the publishing industry at large, in the way I kind of subdivide it and think about it. So if you're thinking of making graphic novels or really comics in print, these are the markets that are available to you. Another big market is webcomics, which isn't covered in this. It's really about the print publishing market. Okay, so there's this really handy, I'm sorry that my screen is in the way. My little icon is in the way. Let me see. Oops. Back.
That did it.
Oh, there, yay. I did it. Okay. So this is a handy graphic of the comics publishing world that was made by someone called Jason Tybalt. And it's from 2018, so that's pretty old. So this is a little outdated, but it is kind of a good place to start to look at what is the publishing market out there for graphic novelists? Where can I be published? And also the way Jason Tybalt thinks about the publishing landscape is a little different than the way I do. So I have made my updates in red, but I think this is a good way to look at the publishing market and think about it. I think there's two big chunks of the publishing market to consider. Like you can kind of divide comics publishing into two big chunks. And one is what we call trade publishing, and that's publishing, book publishing. For one, book publishing, not floppies, but book publishing, graphic novel publishing for a general market. So the places that books are usually sold, like bookstores, or places books usually appear, like in libraries. So that sounds like what trade publishing, that sounds like everything. What is not trade publishing? Well, it's textbooks. That's its own market. It's mass market books, like those weird magazines you see in the grocery store lane. And it's direct market comics, which we're going to talk about next. Those types of publishing have their own markets, their own distribution channels. So yeah, trade publishing. You might have heard the big five publishers. These are the biggest publishers in America. Hachette, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, and Macmillan. I work for Macmillan. I'm a senior editor for Second. It's an imprint of Macmillan Children's Group. And we are the smallest of the big five. And just some terminology here. So these big five, they're publishers. So like the publisher is the parent group. The imprint rather is like a small subgroup. So like Macmillan is the publisher I work at, and for Second is the imprint of Macmillan. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. So I took that chart and these are all the trade publishers on that chart. But because it was made back in 2018, there's a lot missing. A lot of new graphic novel imprints have popped up in the last 8 years or so. So if you look in the left, these are some adult publishers, and there's some new adult imprints that publish graphic novels, at least new since this was made, including 10 Speed Graphic, 23rd Street Books. And then if you go under that to the children's section, that's really exploded. There's a lot of new players. And in fact, in my next slide, yes, I kind of zoom in on that. So yeah, kids comics are big, especially middle grade comics, young adult comics as well, but middle grade, which is age 8 to 12, or there's is sort of huge. And some of them are selling amazingly well. Like if you probably heard of Dogman. I was looking at some numbers in BookScan, which is this program you can use to look up book sales. And oh my God, Dogman, it was all Dogman. The first page was all Dogman, like selling millions of copies. It's just amazing. So you can imagine that's a very valuable asset for a publishing company. So all the kids publishers, and I think I do mean all, like nearly every single one out there, they're in graphic novels now. It doesn't mean they have their own imprint. First Second is its own imprint. We only do graphic novels, but there are a lot of publishers that are just traditional children's publishers, like FSG for young readers, Henry Holt for young readers, Bywell and Friends, Little Brown, a lot of kids publishers that are also doing graphic novels. And then there's also new imprints that are popping up. So some of the new imprints are Harper Alley, Random House Graphic, Little Brown Ink, Little Simon Ink. I think those all came up in like the last 4 years. So this is huge. Like kids comics are huge. It's kind of the market is a little flooded, but these books are still selling pretty well. So it's yeah, if you are interested in doing kids comics, I think success is a little easier to find right now. But yeah, all the kids imprints, they're doing graphic novels now. And some of them do not know how to do it. First Second, we've been doing it for since it's coming up on 20 years almost. I haven't been there that long. I've been there like 10. So First Second, we know pretty well how to edit, how to design, how to publish a graphic novel. Some of these new imprints that are deciding to do graphic, or these imprints that are doing graphic novels for the very first time, an editor may have never edited a graphic novel before, so they might, like, I guess the rookie mistakes I often notice are like, they don't realize how hard it is to make a graphic novel and how long it takes. They think it's like a picture book, and they want to pay like a picture book, and they want to give you that much time. And that's not fair. And then they might ask for so many changes because they think it's like a manuscript. Oh, I'll just move some text around here, rewrite this section. No, redrawing is very hard. So it's just something to keep in mind if you're working with an editor who has never worked with graphic novels before. Don't say no to that job necessarily, but just be kind of cautious. Okay, so these are kids imprints, and it's part of the trade publishing world. Oh yeah, so you might be asking, well, there's so many imprints out there. How do I know which ones are publishing graphic novels? How do I do my research? Who do I pitch to? This is a little tip I have. The American Library Association, it puts out a list of best graphic novels every year. And it's pretty long and robust, and it's in every age group. So middle grade, young adult, adult. So you could just search, like just do a Google search, ALA best graphic novels book of the year. And I did that for 2023. I see, hate to brag, but First Second had 14 titles on the list. Random House Graphic had 12. Harper Alley had 8. So you can just kind of do this research and find out, oh, these are the publishers that are doing pretty well right now. Their books are getting noticed in awards and that sort of thing. So you can do the same thing with adult. Because yeah, there really are two different markets. And when you are, creating something that you might want to pitch, you got to think, is this for a young adult, middle grade, adult market? So for adult, like some of the big players are, DC Comics, Fantagraphics. First Second's doing pretty well again, because we do publish adult as well as kids. Dark Horse, Street Noise is a new adult publisher. Drawn Quarterly. Silver Sprocket is kind of new. They're getting some notice. They're really growing. Humanoids, this new imprint, DC Black Label, Pantheon. So yeah, this is just a good way to do some research about what are the publishers, the imprints that are putting out graphic novels that are getting notice, that are winning awards. So if you are deciding would like to pitch toward them, or I'd like my agent to, here's some ideas to keep in mind. Okay, so we talked, that was the trade market. So the trade market is that general reading audience, like normal everyday readers that buy their books at library or on Amazon, or, they're not necessarily comic fans. The direct market is a market that grew out of comic fandom in the 70s, like out of comic book shops. And so back then, graphic novels weren't really a thing. Originally, you were buying your comics on a newsstand. or like a drugstore or someplace like that. And there weren't comic book shops yet. But then as the comics fandom grew, comic conventions started to be a thing. These shops that tailored to comic fans came on the scene. And the direct market was a distribution system that tailored to those shops and tailored to those readers. And it was a new kind of market. Whereas, okay, so let me back up a little to the trade publishing definition. This might be some insider baseball, but it might be useful. So trade books are returnable. So what does that mean? That means like Macmillan as a publishing house, for second as an imprint. Let's say the Strand orders 500 copies of Ash's Cabin from First Second. That's one of our graphic novels. They order 500 copies. They sell one. They could return 499 copies to us and not pay for them. That doesn't usually work out quite that way, but that's the way the trade publishing industry works. It's returnable. And we're talking about returnable from the store to the publisher, not like I'm a customer, I hate this book, there's a page missing, I'm returning it. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the bookstore can return the products that they do not sell, and they do not pay for those returned products. They only pay for the ones they actually sell. So you can see this is very advantageous to the bookstore. And it's something we have to deal with in trade publishing. It's just kind of the price of doing business. Some books have a lot of returns. If they do a lot worse than we expected, like we did a big, huge print run, thinking this book would be the next big thing, and it happened that like half of the books are returned. That's terrible. That's terrible, terrible. Usually it's more like, 8,000 sold, 1,500, 2,000 are returned. Something more like that. And Tom, maybe you could just shout out if there's any questions, because it's kind of hard for me to pay attention to the chat. But if anything comes up that's like relevant right now, I'm happy to answer a question.
Sure. Or should we take them at the end? Because
either way, I'm good. Whatever works for you guys.
Let's take some at the end, because right now you're giving us an overview, and I think
okay, cool.
Completing that overview is probably a good idea.
Okay, so trade publishing was returnable. Direct market is not. Whatever that comic book store orders, they got to sell or just eat the cost of it. They don't get their money back. And that was kind of when the direct market was made, that was very advantageous for the comics publishers. That was sort of the incentive to let's do this. And so when we're talking about the direct market, we're talking about like floppy comics and comic book stores. That's the easiest way to differentiate the two. And so these are some of the direct market publishers on that chart. So some of these are very familiar to you: Marvel, DC, but also IDW, Dark Horse, Image. Any publisher that really has a stake in floppies in the comic bookstore market. And some of these publishers work in both arenas. Like Marvel, they sell their books at Barnes and Noble and their floppies at comic book shops. But that is a different sort of market. And also the way the publishing houses work in terms of payment and ownership is often quite different. Okay. So we've done trade, we've done direct market. So the next chunk I like to think of as small to medium publishers and the micropresses. So the small to medium publishers, these are independent publishers. Small and medium, I'd say they're a company with sometimes a few employees, sometimes several. And they're independent. Often they aren't part of a publishing group. Like they're not part of Macmillan or Hachette or something. Their Fantagraphics is just wholly owned, independent. But like to be small or medium, I think for one, you're more than one person. Probably you have something of a staff. But I think the most important thing is that you have just a distributor that's distributing your books. So that could be a trade distributor, or it could be a direct market distributor, or you could have both. But there's some business that you're utilizing to warehouse your stock and to get it into bookstores and to get it onto Amazon and get metadata out into the world and Metadata is that all the information, all the data of a book that like exists on an Amazon page, like the title, the author, the page count, the price, the genre, like all that stuff. Like I think a micropress is like the smallest kind of publisher, and they don't have a distributor. They have to do all that stuff themselves. So their reach is quite small. So for example, like Silver Sprocket, it was new to this list. They are a bookstore and publisher in San Francisco, and they have a distributor that warehouses their books and sells their books. I worked with Silver Sprocket on a co-publishing project, an anthology called American Cult. And because I worked with Silver Sprocket, I had access to the distributor. So it meant American Cult got into libraries, American Cult got into bookstores, American Cult was reviewed by Publishers Weekly, American Cult is on Amazon. So it's just a more professional setup when you're working with a distributor. A micropress is usually a one-person business that like it doesn't have that distribution. So they're selling on their website, they're selling at conventions, they're selling through Kickstarter maybe. They're it's a lot more like self-run. Maybe they're going into bookstores individually and maybe they're working with independent distributors like well, Spit and a Half and Birdcage Bottom, which I think aren't in business anymore, but that's an example of very small independent, like one-person distributors who help them get them into the stores, but they're not bookstore distribution. So yeah, like it's kind of like self-publishing micropress. And I have a micropress. And yeah, and we'll talk about that a little more. So, oh yeah, so my micropress is called Paper Rocket Minicomics. Yeah, so I'm too small to have a distributor. Like when you have a bookstore distributor, you do need to put out a large number of books with a spine. Bookstore distributors, they really don't know what to do with mini comics. They can't really sell them. So I'm not the kind of publisher for them. Because most of what I do is mini comics, and I put out like 3 a year. Like to really be big enough to have a distributor represent you, they want a steady output of books. I'm too small for that. So I sell my books at conventions. I have a website. Yes, here's some of my books. So I've been putting out this series called the Mini Memoir Project that is these small square memoir autobiocomics by different people about a story in their childhood. I've done 13 of them in a year and a half. It's been kind of a lot to do them, to keep up with it, to be honest, because I also have about 60 subscribers who I send them out in the mail every time they come out, which is a whole other job. And then, I told you American Cult is an anthology. So that's a book with a spine. And that's the one I collaborated with Silver Sprocket on. So that got into libraries and bookstores and all that stuff. It's kind of cool to be on both sides, to be honest. Like with a mini memoir, it's very handmade and I like sell it by hand and I meet the people who buy it. And it's kind of a fun like experience to make comics that way. And it's very easy. It's very accessible. Anybody can do it really. With American Cult, it's kind of cool that book has had so much more reach. I don't know what the print run is, but I think it's probably at least 2,000, 3,000. That's kind of a lot. These mini memoirs, the print run's like 500 if I'm lucky. So it's kind of cool with American Cult. I run into strangers all the time who have read it, or someone who says, hey, my book club read this, or I saw this in the library. That always feels good. So it's kind of like two extremes of the market. It's kind of fun to be in both a little. So let's see. Oh yeah, I do Kickstarters for all my projects. I do recommend doing a Kickstarter or something like it. Honestly, if you're self-publishing, if you don't do something like this, I think you're kind of leaving money on the table because it's really hard to make money as a micro publisher, as a self-publisher, nearly impossible. So take advantage of what's out there. And with like, for example, American Cult, I made $18,000. For me, that's a lot. Like, like, yeah, with American Cult especially, it was an anthology. It's 200 pages. And I paid $50. Originally, I paid $50 a page, and then with the Kickstarter push goals, I think that was up to 75. So if you do 75 times 200, that's a lot of money. That's thousands and thousands of dollars. I don't have that money. I don't want to like put it on a credit card, but I was able to raise it through Kickstarter. So I do think you should take advantage of that because there's just not a lot of way to sell these things. You got to take advantage of what's out there. Let's see. Oh yeah, and I have a shop. I use Store NB. Probably anything that you see out there is a pretty good big cartel, whatever. Like I like Store NB. It's easy. It's pretty cheap. But I'd say most of the mini comics I sell, I sell them at conventions and I sell them on Kickstarter. And every once in a while I still sell them on the store. And so yeah, so Paper Rocket, that's my side gig, I even call it a hobby. Like I know that's kind of a bad word. But it's a labor of love. I do it's my artistic expression. My day job, what I do, the bigger role I guess I play in comics publishing is I'm a senior editor at First Second. So that's one of those trade publishers. So it's a whole different world. And I'll just keep self-publishing as long as I can keep it up, really. And I think, oh yeah, I want to talk a little bit more. So like, how can you guys use this information? Well, one, if you want to work in publishing, like that's might be useful, but also if you're like, I want to pitch my graphic novel to one of these places. One thing to know is, unfortunately, many publishing houses do not accept unsolicited and unagented submissions. First Second is one of those, I must admit. And it's just a capacity thing. Like I get so many submissions. I pretty much get one a business day a year.
Wow.
And that's a lot. And I might acquire 5 books a year. So that's a lot of no. That's like almost completely no. And that's with the rule that only agents and solicited submissions get through. So I just wouldn't have capacity, like turn on the fire hose and take everything. And none of us would. So that's why it's kind of a mean rule, but it is pretty common in trade publishing. But there are some comics publishers out there that do accept unsolicited submissions. They're often smaller and independent. And if you want to search, you can just put the publisher's name plus the word submissions. But here's a list. I'm sure it's not oops, it's kind of, I'm sorry, it's not, it's displaying weird. I'll try to get a better, I'll try to get this information to Tom. But I have a small, not complete list of publishers I know of that do accept submissions that are unsolicited. But the thing to understand is like, that's probably not the best way to get your work published. In my experience, instead of sending cold submissions to a stranger, do the work on your end to make connections, to put your work out there, to publish mini comics, get in anthologies, publish web comics, do Instagram, to not be a stranger, because like cold submissions from strangers rarely go anywhere. But a recommendation from a friend in the industry to an editor they know, that can go far. Or an agent discovering your work at a convention, or when they're doing portfolio reviews at your school, or when they're like looking on Instagram. Like so I think rather than submitting cold to an unknown person, do the work now to create your body of work, get it out there in the world and make connections. And usually it's one of those connections that leads to some sort of success. And you don't even know what that may be. Like the reason I work at First Second is because I met Calista Brill at a editor's day at CCS. And that changed my life because like she recommended me to my first editorial job. And then I eventually started working freelance for Calista. And then I got hired when there was an opening. So much about this stuff is who you know and timing and luck. And there's only so much you can do about timing and luck, but you can at least do the who you know work on your end. So yeah, that's kind of my spiel, I think. And I think I'm gonna just close out of this now that we're done.
Okay. Well, we do have lots of questions, and what I'd like to do, I actually collected them, I think, accurately, and I'm going to repost them in the chat. But what I'd like to do, ideally, is if you had a question, then raise your Zoom hand, and we'd prefer that you ask it on screen. I don't want to be the only one talking. So I saw that Lynn Bernstein, for instance, and Leonie had some, and Brandon had some. So if you're in the list that I just posted and you want to ask, or if you have a different question, then let's go ahead and do that. So Brandon's got a question. Thanks, Robyn, so much for this, by the
Oh,
way.
no
Very
problem.
generous. Brandon, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for this. This has been extremely informative. Um, my question is, I'm actually reading the screen because I almost forgot how I phrased it. So how has the publishing world changed since more and more publishing houses begun to distribute outside of Diamond Comics? Because I remember especially like in 2020, 2021, even DC like didn't they stop using Diamond for a while too? So I'm just curious like how the landscape has changed in the wake of COVID and everything.
You know, my whole professional career, I've been in the trade market, so I don't know a lot about the direct market, but I do know it's changing a lot. They, for example, um, Penguin Random House started a direct market distribution effort. And I think that they distribute Marvel now or something. Like I can't remember exactly who they're distributing, but like that's the biggest publisher in America. Like now they're getting into the direct market. So it is kind of good though that the direct market is growing beyond Diamond, I think, because for so long Diamond did have the oh yeah, and there's Lunar. Lunar is another one that's new, and it seems what they're doing is pretty exciting. So there's kind of three big players. A Lunar, Diamond is probably maybe the biggest, Penguin Random House and then Lunar. Um, but like my whole professional experience has been working for a trade publisher that just did the trade market.
Mhm.
And it's a very healthy market, especially in kids. The nice thing about the kids market is that there's schools and libraries, and kids love reading graphic novels. They don't need to be tricked into it or anything. They're hungry for them. They ask for them. They rotate at the libraries very heavily. So and for second has a great connections with librarians. So like a lot of our books go to libraries. And there's libraries all over the country. There's public libraries and there's school libraries. So I think that is a big, especially certainly a big development, is that like the way the kids comics market has grown in like the last 15 years. It's been pretty strong and steady, which is a rare thing to find in publishing. Publishing is a pretty hard industry to make profit in, to be honest.
Mm.
So I guess it's kind of, it's hard to say like how those markets opening up has changed things, but it does mean that like graphic novels are getting more recognition in the world at large by people who don't necessarily usually read graphic novels. They're getting awards that they never got before. They're getting turned into media at higher rates beyond the Marvel movies. Like those are huge too. Yeah, so I don't know, it's hard to say, but we still need more adult readership, really, I think, to make the market a lot healthier, because it's a little harder. Like I think all kids these days read graphic novels. They do not need to be convinced they're there. But there's a lot of adults who still don't. And so hopefully that'll be a generational thing. And in a few years, it'll be more normal for adults to read graphic novels because it still feels a little niche. It's a little harder to have success in the trade market with adult graphic novel unless it's a really big hit that is award winning and gets some huge notice. Yeah, I hope that helps. I'm not sure if that exactly answered your question.
It does help. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, Lynn's got one, and then I think Sally has a good follow-up to what I think is Lynn's question. Lynn, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. You keep talking about graphic novels for kids, and I'm just wondering, what about nonfiction, graphic nonfiction and histories? Are those popular or as popular? You think there's any space for those?
There definitely is space in it, and they're growing. I mean, where I work, we have a series called Science Comics that's been very successful. We have like almost 40 volumes of it. We put out 2 a year. They almost always earn out, which is a metric in the publishing world. They earn their advance, which is pretty rare. So the STEM, there's a hunger for STEM nonfiction graphic novels, and there's a growing hunger for history stuff. Like we have our history comic series. It doesn't do quite as well as the science comics, but there are some other players out there that do really well, like the Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales, and this there's this popular prose novel for kids called I Survived, the series, and now there's the I Survived graphic novels, and those are really huge. Like I Survived the Titanic. I Survived 9/11. And there's also the series called I think it's called it's like I was so and so. I was
Yes, I know.
Yeah, you
those
know it with
books
the
are
big
great.
heads.
Yeah. I taught third grade.
Yeah. Like the kids,
totally.
like now they're doing graphic novels of those.
I love those. Yeah.
And all those series are very popular. So there's been graphic novel series of popular nonfiction history series. And there's other little series that pop up from publishers all over. Some do better than others. But there is space for that. And again, it's the library, school library, like classroom and homeschooling markets that like kind of help bolster that, I think. I mean, at least that's our theory for why, like, for example, Science Comics is doing so well. And so I do think I think it's growing. So there's still a couple of unknowns. But there's definitely a lot of imprints are trying their hand at that. And even if it's not graphic novel, there's a lot of illustrated nonfiction that you probably could do just as well. Yeah, so I do think there's space out there. Yeah.
Great.
Sally's got a related question. You want to ask?
Yeah. Hey, Robyn.
Hey.
It's good to see you. Robyn was my instructor back in the day at some workshops at CCS.
Wow, it's great. Yeah, it's great to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for the talk. It was really helpful.
Oh, no problem.
I'm working on a YA sort of fictionalized memoir, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on like the upper thresholds of difficult topics for YA audience. Like I'm thinking of things like depictions of family members or friends in active substance abuse or drug use or alcohol abuse. What are those upper thresholds for those like more difficult topics for that YA audience? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, that does. I think with YA, like you do have a lot of freedom. I think it's a lot trickier if you're going to do middle grade. I feel like like with YA, it's almost like you're almost an adult, and there are going to be some things that you might, and it really depends on the publisher too. Like, I've been at publishers where they have really strict rules about like, you can't put this in a kid's comic, you can't put this in a teen's comic. And at First Second, we don't have those rules. We do have like some general like guidance or like rule of like or wisdom that we use. So it really depends on the publisher, and you can just look at their body of work. I think with young adult, there is a lot of space. Like one thing you have to keep in, I think the biggest thing is going to be the graphic visual part of it, rather than the topic. I think that like, if you're like, I think there's a lot of topics you can like touch on, including some of those hardest stuff to ever read, like, you know, child abuse and suicide and things like that. But showing them is going to be like visually, that's where you might want to be careful. Because and that's often where, or at least it used to be that's one of the reasons that like graphic novels get banned, because it's like the graphics are right there. You can't really hide the content. Now it just seems like people are doing a word search of the topic and banning them.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
But so I do think be careful about the visuals of it.
Okay.
But yeah, if working within YA, like I think you have a lot of space to touch on that heavy stuff. But I think with any book, you just have to be careful about like, it's hard. It's something I've dealt with because I edited a graphic novel, a graphic memoir about a kid whose mother was killed. His mother was killed by his father. It's like,
I read it. It was beautiful. It was beautiful.
Oh, thank you. And that was middle grade, so it was even harder.
Yeah.
And like through the editing process, like the challenge with working with Damien Alexander, the author, is like, this stuff is really heavy. You had a very hard childhood. this stuff is important. We want to talk about it, but how do we make this read ultimately like hopeful and uplifting and not so much of a depressing slog to I
Yes.
don't know how else to put like so much
Yeah.
of a heavy read that like you're crushing the 12-year-old soul. So that like that I think that that's a relevant question to like almost anything, any age
Uh-huh.
group. But like
Like,
yeah,
would it be supportive maybe? Would it be helpful for that person reading it?
yeah, I think like ultimately you do need it to like have some sort of like, and especially for a young audience, like some sort of like hopeful, helpful, supportive, like it just can't be like 100% downer. I don't know if that's like to put it.
That totally, yeah.
But for content, like your editor would guide your way. I like nudity,
Uh-huh.
is hard.
Yeah.
Showing sex, showing
Uh-huh.
genitalia, like that's
Yeah.
probably gonna be hard.
No,
Um,
maybe bad words, cuss words.
where I work, not so much. You wouldn't want it to be like,
Okay.
and this is YA, middle grade, that's another one, but why like a couple of cuss words is fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Cuss words probably are allowed more than slurs.
Oh, yeah.
Slurs would definitely, but sometimes like, hey, if you were called a slur, like you might feel like it's important to include that slur in the book rather than like erase it. So yeah, I think it really depends on the editor. I
Yeah.
feel like there's a history of like young adult memoirs outside of graphic novels, memoirs and such that cover these heavy topics. And then with graphic novels, you just got to think about like how does the visual aspect change things. But yeah, it'll depend a lot on your publisher, your editor. But I really think it's the genitalia showing this stuff, showing the sex act.
Yeah.
Like it's probably gonna be a hard no.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I've only had edited one graphic novel where we did that, and it was very much an adult romance graphic novel.
Okay. That's awesome. So helpful. And yeah, Damien's book, I think I sent a note to both you and
Oh yeah, you
Damien
did.
saying,
Thank you. That meant a
I
lot.
was like, this is a book that would have helped me if I had found it when I was a kid. If it had been published by that time, it would have been really supportive. So thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob.
That's awesome. Thanks, Sally. And Robyn, to be clear, that book is Other Boys, right? Because he's got
Other
other
Boys.
books.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it is middle grade. It was kind of, I still feel like it's sort of an outlier because one, I don't think there's too many middle grade memoirs about like coming out and being gay. Like there's a lot of more YA. And also that it was just like some pretty like heavy, serious stuff. It was kind of like Hey Kiddo, but Hey Kiddo was YA. So it's kind of like Hey Kiddo was this very successful graphic memoir about a parent who was an addict and the kid was being raised by their grandparents. So that was like a pretty strong comp for us, but it was a little unusual for us to, we want to do this for a 14-year-old, a 13-year-old. That's how old Damien is. But yeah, I think it's pretty good. I mean, actually, I love it. I think it's great.
There's still some questions in the chat. I'm going to pick and choose from the chat but I'm mostly going to go by how simple the question is and how simple I think the answer will be, and I'll get progressively harder. So Gail's got a question, which I think is simple. She says, do you only work with books that are submitted, or do you occasionally find some on your own?
Yeah, I do find some on my own. Though I guess it's mostly these days like submissions that come through from agents or from known creators. But I go to conventions, I go to like schools. Sometimes when I find somebody in those places, it's more about like, oh, I like your work, I'd like to work with you someday. And then they reach out and we talk about like maybe what they could submit, and they submit something. More than like me discovering like the mini comic on their table and I'm like, this should be a graphic novel. I don't know if that's happened yet. Like it totally could. And like the thing that happens a little more often with me and like some of my coworkers is we'll discover a webcomic that is like nearly done or done. And then we really like it and we just like translate to the graphic novel page. So that's not submitted, that's discovered. Yeah, so we're looking for you guys too. So that's why you got to do the extra step of like making yourself available to be found, by having a website and Instagram, going to conventions, being in anthologies, all those things, putting yourself out there, because we are looking for you. I know it's frustrating that in publishing a lot of doors are closed to unagented authors, but there's still a lot you can do with the connections you can make and the work you can put out by self-publishing and that sort of thing. Yeah.
That leads to another question I was going to ask, very related, and it's something you hit upon, but maybe you can talk about it a tiny bit more. You mentioned meeting people and building your connections and stuff. And Leonie asks, so how do you get an agent? Is it like if I have no traction, I have no agent, and I can't get any traction if I don't have an agent, like
But I mean, people like at first second, probably a third of our creators don't have agents. So don't think that if you don't have an agent, you can't be published. I think I hear that out there, and at least where I work, that's not the case. And with the smaller publishers, they're very open to not working with agents. But like, so to get an agent, it's a whole process. It's which I've just recently kind of learned about it, because I'm teaching this class at SVA, so I had to learn about it to tell my students about it. But there are a lot of agencies out there. They all have websites that like say what their submission policies are, but like agents pretty much, unless an agent is closed to submissions, but most house agencies do have some sort of apparatus for you to send a submission or a query. And there's a website called Query Tracker, which is free to join. And you could join and you could do and not all agents are on Query Tracker, but like most of them are. You could just do a search of which agents are accepting graphic novels. And there's probably a list of 100 or 200 agents on there that are. So that's a way to get a list of names. And then you can just go to it'll tell you in Query Tracker how they take submissions, how you submit your proposal. But that would also be on their agency website. But it's like with getting an agent, it's like if you have to pitch twice, first you pitch the agent, and then if you get an agent, then the agent pitches to the publisher. And during that time, you're developing and improving the pitch.
Yes, Luna.
So that's a way to find an agent. But again, like I just had an agent, Gianna Morishima, come into my class, and she had put this little chart of like how she found her clients. And at the bottom, it was like 30% at comic conventions, 20% on Instagram. At the bottom was with cold submissions, 0%. So like, and that's just her story, but I do think it's again, it's making those connections. The agents are going to schools, they're going to conventions, they're looking on Instagram. So like sometimes the agent finds you, but you can also query. I have a coworker, Casper Manning, who found an agent that way. He just spent a couple of months like using Query Tracker and like pitching to different agents, and finally found one who was interested, and then they had a conversation, and then they had an agreement, and then they pitched his book, and then his book got acquired. So but there are a lot of like YouTube videos and stuff on how to find an agent. So thankfully there is a lot of information online for how to do one, but like look at Query Trackers and Manuscript Wish List are good places to look. These websites are built for prose novels and nonfiction. They're not built for graphic novels. They've been kind of retrofitted to fit graphic novels in. So a lot of what you're going to see is not for graphic novels, but there is a space for graphic novels in there. You can just search for graphic novels in those places.
I wonder how much Jana or any other agent would mention recommendations from their list already. Like, a lot of times it's like, oh, I'll show this to my agent. I think this is
yes, that
right?
is very good. Like, I mean, it works on my side too. Like people we publish at First Second, they'll recommend somebody, and we do like look at those, same with agents. Like, and sometimes agents recommend stuff to other agents, like I'm full, but I think you might like this within the same house or even at different agencies. So yeah, the connections, it really does matter. And asking your friends who have agents, that for advice, like that'd be good too. But usually either the agent discovered them or they might have queried the agent. Yeah, that's kind of usually how it works.
Related to this, if you don't have an agent, I think I'm asking this question correctly. Let me just, it's from Mike King. How do you pitch by yourself? are there requirements to think about style and format and things like that? And he says where to even start. So a little
Yeah, so like I said, I'm sorry, I'm gonna find that. I'm gonna open my PowerPoint and like paste in that list of publishers that I know of who accept unsolicited submissions, and it's kind of a small list, to be honest. And there's probably ones I'm missing, but these are the ones I know. So let's see. I think I can put this in a chat.
awesome.
Let's see. Because a lot of publishers, especially the big ones, they're not going to accept unsolicited submissions. So you can't pitch them. You don't even know where to start because they don't give you the information. They don't give you the email to contact. And if the email somehow gets through, they're not going to consider it because, you know, them's the rules. Unsolicited submissions. Okay. But all these publishers do, you can see they tend to be smaller and independent. And if you just type the name like Dark Horse plus the word submissions into Google, you probably find their requirements. And let's see, so that, yeah, you just need to really carefully follow their submission guidelines and also do your research to make sure this publisher is in line with what you're doing. I've looked at a lot of these submission pages and I see it again and again. They're like, please do not make, you know, we only publish graphic novels. Like you can tell that the fact that they're saying this is they're getting a lot of like blind submissions where someone's just submitting to every publisher they know their manuscript and they're not taking the time to research and tailor their submissions. Don't submit blindly, do your research. Make sure that, for example, Drawn Quarterly accepts graphic novels, that they publish the kind of graphic novel you're pitching, that if it's a kid's book, they publish kids. If it's adult, they publish adult, but also that it's like kind of in line with their sort of values. And so then like you follow their submission guidelines and it's kind of like applying for a job, except for the job, there's not usually not an open they're trying to desperately fill. But treat it like a job application where you're just being very professional, concise, humble, and also you are giving them a lot of compliments, like saying, hey, you know, I want to share this manuscript with you because I love Drawn and Quarterly. Linda Barry is a hero to me. And what I'm submitting to you, I think is a lot like what it is. So, I don't know, something like that, you know. Yeah, but you do need to be a little humble. Like, don't go overboard and say like, this is the next big thing. It's going to sell better than Smile. It's going to sell better than Ducks. It's going to sell better than American-born Chinese because that's a little presumptuous. Yeah, and yeah, so that's how you submit blindly. And sometimes it works. Most of the time it doesn't. Like again, connection. It's really better to spend your time like building up your body of work, putting your work out there, making connections. You can do both, of course, like work in both streams. But don't put the cart before the horse. Like I think before you start pitching blindly, have a website, have an Instagram, have something of a following, have your work out in anthologies, have mini comics, have like do something to put yourself out there. Because the first thing that when someone like sends me a submission, I actually just like Google their name, and if I can't find anything, I'm like, I don't know who this person is. I can't find them. Like they're probably nobody. Like, but if here's a website and a portfolio and here's a web comic and etc. Yeah. So before, I think really do more to build your body of work and put your work out there, rather than like submitting blindly.
I have a question I'd like to ask, and I hope I can make it clear. That is, maybe I'm telling a great story. Maybe it's my life story. Maybe it's my childhood story or something. But it's a story that feels like it's already been told. Like, let's say I have a story about a parent with addiction and substance abuse, and there's domestic violence in the story and stuff like that. If I bring it to you, are you going to say, yeah, but we already did this story and it's too close to it? How often does that kind of thing happen where a story that is valid in every other way and maybe even well told, it's just like there's just not room for it? Does that make sense?
It does come up. And like one thing that you might not be aware of, but the editor will definitely be considering is like, how well did that other book do?
Uh-huh.
Because like if that other book did amazing,
Uh-huh.
like it might be a little easier to accept something like that's pretty similar to it. But if that other book, even though it was, it was a masterpiece, it was great, like you love it, it didn't sell well, then like if you try to acquire another one, like you go to the acquisition meeting, they're like, well, look at the sales track on this other book that was just like it. We're not going to do another one. Like we have this data that this isn't working. So,
Mhm.
so sometimes there's that, and sometimes it's like, yeah, we do have something that is like so similar that we're not the best house for it. But I think it does have to be very similar, not like as broadly as like, oh, we already have a queer romance YA. Like we don't need another one. Obviously, we have a lot of that and we want a lot more. So like not broad
Uh-huh.
categories, but like something that's very specific. Like I don't know if for a second would do another like ice skating graphic memoir. Like we did Spinning that did so well.
Mhm.
To do like something that was also about figure skating. Like that might be too similar, but
Mhm.
maybe not. Like so yeah, like maybe just another house should do that.
But
Um
another house might be interested. They might be
yeah,
like, we
yeah.
loved the book that First Second did that was like this, and we'd like to have something like that on our roster. That might happen,
So
right?
you see, it's yeah, it's kind of a hard thing to answer. But if it's very, very similar, I don't know if that means you shouldn't pitch. You probably still should, but like that is like something an editor would think about.
Um, Donna asks, what about fun, uplifting stories, fantasy,
Mhm.
sci-fi? Why are all the questions about the hard stuff? As a reader, I'm going for the fun stuff, she says.
Well, yeah, let's talk about the fun stuff. Like where I work, we are kind of over acquired on fantasy, middle grade fantasy adventure. And there's a lot of it out in the market. So it's a little more challenging. I think you'll probably find this at other places as well. Um, but yeah, like that is another, genre you can try for. Like another genre that's popped up in the last 5 years or whatever that doesn't have a really good name except for the Dogman genre, is like graphic novels that are Dogman or like Dogman. If you've been paying attention to the kids market, you will have seen these. Um, some of them are doing very well, and like everybody's trying to do the next Dogman. So that would be very silly, young, funny, kind of boy centric. He like not necessarily books that like, oh, this book is only for boys, but like it does have like kind of a nice boy centric humor that does capture that audience the ways uh maybe some other like genres don't. But yeah, like so that's I mean that's another thing to consider is, but at the same time we're all getting all these Dogman-esque pitches. It's like Dogman pitches or like Narwhal and Jelly type pitches. Like it's like we've been getting a lot of that. So
What?
Narwhal and Jelly is like this younger, it's like younger than middle grade. It's like, maybe like 6 to 9 or 5 to 8 readership that is about a narwhal and a jellyfish and their friends. And it's very simple, fun graphic novel. There's a lot of these like very young kid graphic novels that are like friend and friend or friend and friend and friend. And like one of them might be like a food. Like if you've done your research, like if you work with kids, you might know exactly what I'm talking about, like pizza and taco and peanut butter and crackers and blueberry and pancakes. Like these are real things. We published one of them. We published blueberry and pancakes. Um, like I don't know, we all had the same idea at the same time. It's like friend and friend and friends, and one's a box or one's a log or one's an apple or one's a caterpillar. And it's silly. They're young. They're very short. They're easy to read graphic novels. So there are some that have done like bird and squirrel. There's some that have done very well. And so yeah, like I mean, I guess like any other business, when something succeeds, like people do a similar version of it and try to chase that success. So like if you are interested in the like the fun, like young fantasy adventure or like action adventure sort of stuff, like yeah, I'd say there's fantasy adventure middle grade, there's the dog man, there's the bird and squirrel type stuff, and then there's like YA fantasy. And yeah, these are great markets. I feel like I think the I think that the real life stuff sells a little better, to be honest.
Hmm.
The memoir or the memoir-esque stuff. Like from my standpoint, that is a sort of a steadier seller. Like it's almost like we can't get enough of that, but we are kind of like the market on the fantasy is a little flooded.
Hmm. Okay, well, maybe we've got time for one or two more questions. I don't see. So if you've got a question that I didn't answer or ask, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I think I sort of covered them all. Although, oh, great, Maria's got one. Let's go to Maria real fast. Maria, do you want to ask it? There you are. You'll have to unmute.
Hi, yeah, I was wondering, I know this is probably too technical a question, but how do you format your images when you're sending a pitch? Because I kind of feel like some agents might be nervous about clicking on attachments and the like.
Yeah, I'm sure the agencies will, they'll all have their submission guidelines. So they'll have some way for you to submit. And so you shouldn't be too worried about that. And yeah, just follow their guidelines. Like whatever portal they use to accept submissions, they've deemed that safe. Like for me, I click on things all the time. Maybe I click on too much. I did one of these presentations once where it's like, oh yeah, when I get a pitch, the first thing I do is just click on the attachment. They're like, you open the attachment with that? Like, well, I mean, yeah, I don't like maybe I wouldn't if I was open to unsolicited submissions and I could get emails from anybody. But yeah, like that's how like we're used to opening attachments. And I think that any publishing house or agency will give you some guidelines. For what I want, I just want a PDF that's not too big and that does not have an expiration date on when I can download it. I hate WeTransfer. I I I too busy. I wait too long. I can't download it. So I guess that's the number one thing for me is like I don't want a password. Make it as easy as possible for me to open it. Yeah, I just want a PDF that is not crazy big, and I don't have to I can just click on it.
Second,
Thank
Maria.
you.
Real quick, Leonie also asks, 'cause she's in the UK. Do you know how any of this stuff works in the UK or Europe or anything like that? A similar.
Well, you can have a UK agent, you can have an American agent. For me, like as a editor at First Second, where you live is like a somewhat minor consideration. It really depends on the book. Like one thing, if you live outside the US, that probably means we can't have any sort of like domestic book launch tour event. It'd be harder to get you to conventions and so that's something to consider. But for sometimes that's not really important. For example, like that science comic series I was telling you about, each one is a different author. That series is really led like by its own brand, rather than an individual author. So authors could live wherever and it doesn't come up. Uh, and then it's a 1099. So it's just like freelance income. Depending on where you live, there's tax treaties. The tax treaty with the UK is quite good. Like if you live in a country where the US does not have a great relationship with it, you might be heavily taxed. But it's just freelancer income, the 1099, a flat fee that's paid to you or your agent. So yeah, for me, the biggest consideration with someone who lives outside the US is is this a book that needs a strong US publicity book tour sort of thing. And a book that came out this year, it's called Continental Drifter. I think it's really quite great. It's one of my books. She lives in Germany. She's from Thailand. She's never been to the US for an event, like with a book. It did limit a little of what we could do promotion-wise. But it really didn't change the conversation too much. Like I think the biggest thing we probably consider is just like, how does this affect the way we can promote the book? Because the author probably will not be available to promote it in the US.
This is great. I think I want to ask one last question, and it's about the micropress, because we haven't really talked about that. Who do you publish on the micropress, and how do you make those decisions?
Well, I've been like in this scene for so long that a lot of the people I publish are my friends, or but also like because I guess because I've done that work of putting myself out there and being a part of this community and I like I'll often like do a Kickstarter for like the mini memoir project, and I'll usually get a couple of blind submissions from people I don't know because of the Kickstarter. And several of the mini memoir folks I sign up that way. And same thing with the American Cult. Like probably not as many, but a few people reached out because of the Kickstarter, and I liked what they did, so I said, hey, let's work together. So it's usually people I know who I just reach out to, and I say, hey, I'm doing this mini memoir project. I'd love it if you do an issue. Here's how much I pay. Here's what the specs. Here's all that. Let's see. Like sometimes I just discover stuff online. Like there's been a couple of things, or at Desert Island, a comic store in Brooklyn, or someplace from like, oh, this is really good. I'm just going to reach out to this person. But usually it's not like that. Usually it's either someone I know or someone reaches out to me. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, this has been great. Robyn, thank you. It's been we haven't even mentioned election day. We did a good job. Since it doesn't seem like there's any more questions, I am gonna ask everyone just to let's see if I can do this. Just gonna ask them all to unmute and just give you a round of applause and say thank you, and we hope you see you at one of the events or something, and introduce yourself at Robyn. If you see Robyn, say, I saw you on a SAW Zoom call, and I appreciated everything you said. So thank you, Robyn. Thank you, everybody else. Let's give Robyn a round of applause. Robyn, I appreciate you so much.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good
Thank
one.
you.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank
Robyn.
you
Don't
so
forget to
much.
vote.
See
Don't
you
forget to
later.
vote. Indeed.
Bye.
Thanks, Robyn. We'll talk soon.
Talk soon.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This has been a production of the Sequential Artists Workshop, or SAW. You can find us on social media at Comics Workshop and online at sawcomics.org. You can hear about our many courses at learn.sawcomics.org. SAW is a nonprofit and supported by people like you. Learn how to make a tax-deductible donation at the donate page of sawcomics.org. You can join our free community of comics explorers at members.sawcomics.org. Thanks so much for being here.